All right. So again, we're going to go over a little bit of the basics of kind of the structure and development of a creative nonfiction piece, since that's what we're going to be doing in checkpoint 2 is critiquing a creative nonfiction piece that we all read together. How is it structured? How is it developed? What are the tools the author uses to get the point across? Okay, so I'm going to be sharing my screen here. No notes to take right now. You can kind of just be following along. If you want to screenshot anything, feel free. We are recording as well, so it'll be up on YouTube later today. But analyzing structure and development in creative nonfiction. Creative nonfiction is not just what happened, but how it felt. So again, that whole idea of making, you know, the thing that is based in real fact, that actually happened, make it also feel relatable to the reader. Okay. So when we talk about structure, we mean, identifying the organization strategy, including the purpose or function of all the key sections that we have, and then evaluating the effectiveness of the strategy in developing overall meaning. So if we think about this picture right here, how is this building structured? What's the structure of this building? What can we say? You can respond in the chat or you can come off mute. Coming off mute is a little easier when I'm sharing a screen like this since I can't see the chat, but what do you think? Looking at this picture right here, how is this building structured? Just checking the chat. Nothing in there yet. Anybody with a thought? Don't overthink it. How's it structured? What's its shape like?
It's a circular something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's like a big circular, big cylinder, right? So if we look more closely, what are the key elements that hold it up?
The wires, like the little small wires in between.
Yep. These little wires right here. And do we think those elements are effective in holding it up? Are they doing a good job?
Yep.
Yeah, obviously, because it's still upright and it hasn't fallen down. So structure in creative nonfiction is just like that. There's a bunch of different kinds, different ways we can structure a creative nonfiction piece, but they all do the same thing. They help hold up a building that's structured in a certain way, and they all try and play a part. So these are just a few um, examples here of ways we can structure creative nonfiction. We could have a narrative structure, which is telling the story chronologically from beginning to end, right? And as we're going through these, see if you can think of examples of movies or stories that you've seen that kind of follow these structures that pop into your head, right? One that pops into my head for this one is um, the movie Ray with Jamie Foxx. Um, that tells the story of Ray Charles, and that one pretty much starts, you know, when he's born in Florida, and then goes right up until he dies. So it's kind of chronological. There's also a braided structure, which is telling the story by weaving or combining two or sometimes three narratives or stories, right? So this would be like if you have one story being told from several different points of view, right? That would be a way to um, tell a creative nonfiction story that way. Okay. A collage structure would be using a thematic and segmented approach that combines a quotation or two, a poem, a scene, a metaphor, simile, allusion, personification, image vignette, anecdote, short true story with an epiphany. So, in other words, you're using a bunch of different literary devices. Like these are all um, literary elements, types of figurative language, right? Metaphor, simile. Some of these probably sound familiar. Okay, you're putting a bunch of them together, just like a collage of pictures. You have a collage of all these different elements that kind of work together to tell this story. Right? You could have a frame structure, which is telling a story by opening with a particular scene or reflecting and closing with a particular scene or reflection. So the story is framed around that one particular scene or event. And so again, if this is nonfiction, we know it's facts, right? So maybe somebody's telling their memoir and they talk about, when I was little, I rode my bike and I crashed into a tree and that changed my whole life. And then they tell their story framed around that event. Okay. That would be an example of a frame structure. And then finally, narrative with flashback, telling a story using scene summary, reflection, and flashbacks. So when I think of this one, I think of the movie Walk the Line about the singer Johnny Cash. That movie starts with him kind of uh, in the later years, or like the middle years of his career when he's performing at a prison, and then it flashes back to when he's younger, and then kind of goes chronologically, and then it meets again in the place where it started. You could also, uh, that could also be a little bit of frame structure too. So just some different examples of structures. Now, what techniques make the section effective? That's what we want to think about when we talk about structure, because authors use many different techniques in their writing to effectively convey a theme or develop their arguments. So we're talking about things like, the sensory language. Can we imagine how that would smell or taste or feel? All right. The scene or the summary, the setting, the narrative arc, the description, the character, personal reflections, all these things go into what makes, just like, the wires make the structure effective. This is the stuff that makes the narrative structure effective in the way we tell the story, what holds it all up. Okay. So that's what we talk about, what we mean when we talk about structure. And again, we're going to be looking at this a little bit more in depth with, an example, a story as an example to use. Questions about anything so far? That's not what I want. I do that all the time. Cool. Almost done. All right. Now we're looking at development. So development is analyzing how characters, ideas, or events unfold over time. So structure is the way we, tell the story. And then development is the way we, you know, the people in that story unfold over time. How do they develop? All right. Explaining the connections between the ideas, events, and characters, and explaining how they contribute to the story as a whole, or the theme or the central idea. So just like, right, this plant, right, it develops over time, right? It starts like this as a little kind of seedling, and then it's growing into this, and now we have the full plant here. What is the connection between the pot, and the plant? How does the development uh, of the plant, that's a little bit of a typo there, contribute to something overall? So the plant has to be in the plot, or excuse me, the plant has to be in the pot for it to grow, right? Has to have that soil, has to have that water, has to get that sunlight. And then eventually, as it grows, all right, that development contributes to, the overall plant and the end result. So, narrative, development kind of works that same way. We have these characters, these ideas, these events that all kind of work together to tell our whole story, and they unfold over time, just like this plant. So three different types of development here. We can develop our characters, right? Individuals are introduced and then we slowly learn more about them over time, or they actually grow and change over time. We can develop our events, right? One event leads to another until the story comes to a resolution, right? This is called plot in fiction. So same thing, like you have rising action, climax, falling action, right? You can still have that same kind of thing in creative nonfiction, right? Or we can develop our ideas, which is, we introduce an idea and then it's slowly built on throughout a piece of writing, right? So we can develop one of these, we can develop all three, okay? Again, think about shows or movies that you've seen, especially, we're talking about creative nonfiction. So if any of you are big, true crime documentary buffs, think about like how they develop those events. Like maybe they start with the crime itself and then they pull it back and they develop it more. And like now we learn who the killer is. Now we learn who their other victims are. Now we learn about the killer's childhood. That's all developing this kind of stuff to tell that bigger story, right? So how does all this work? What is the point of all this, right? What we're eventually going to do is look at a short creative nonfiction piece, and we're going to try to critique, and analyze its model, or excuse me, its structure and development. So that's what they've done here. As an example, they've used this article, "The Myth of the Latin Woman" by Judith Ortiz Cover. Uh, and so we can see how they analyze its structure and development. Now, ours is obviously not going to be quite as intense and detailed as this, but it just gives you a basic idea of the stuff we want to look for. So if we read through, we can see it says the Myth of the Latin Woman, Judith Ortiz Cover uses the structure and anecdotes and reflection to develop the idea that anyone from a different culture will experience stereotypes wherever they go. An example of one of these anecdotes, and again, an anecdote is just kind of short little story, is when she tells the story of uh, when she was at a bookstore to sign copies of her book, when a woman in the cafe area waves her over. The woman tries to order a cup of coffee from the author, thinking she was a waitress. This anecdote ties back to the other anecdotes because they center around, a lot of typos here, they center around the same theme and contain reflections of how these stories affected the author. So she's using, you know, two of these kind of structure techniques, right? She's using anecdotes, so short little stories or memories, and then she's using reflections. How did she feel about these little these memories, these events, and then that all works together to further her central idea that anyone from a different culture will experience stereotypes wherever they go. All right. The connecting theme between all of these anecdotes and their reflections is that racial and cultural stereotypes follow you around, and that even though others may mock or judge your culture, it is okay to embrace it. This anecdote was very effective in relating back to the main theme because it demonstrated how when people see her, they assume she fits society's stereotype of what a Latin woman should be. The particular story was effective because I found that it was very relatable into my own and many other people's lives. Situations similar to that the author described have occurred in my own life and in the lives of those I know. The previous anecdote really allowed the reader to sympathize and relate to the author, making her anecdote even more powerful when connecting back to the central theme. So very wordy again. Ours might not be quite as detailed, but we can see the different things that this person does. First of all, they address, the name of the piece and the author. They talk about, the kind of structure elements they use. Okay, she uses anecdotes and reflections, and here's how those anecdotes and reflections tie back to her central idea or her central theme, right? That she outlines right here, right? Gives an example of how they do that, right? And then makes a personal connection at the end, right? This is why this story was effective and relatable to me. Okay. And if we can do all those things effectively, then we'll have done a good job of analyzing the development and structure of a piece. So that's what we're going to try to do in checkpoint 2. We'll get a little practice with that next week. Okay. Questions about anything? I know there was a lot of me talking at you guys. Hopefully, you were able to follow along, and this recording will be up on YouTube in a bit. But questions about anything before we go? All right, awesome. A couple quick reminders. All school assembly at 11:30. It's in about 10 minutes. So giving shouts out for progress reports and stuff like that. Please make sure you attend. Miss C should have sent you out all a Zoom link to your Yes Philly email. And if you are behind on checkpoint 1 for this class, make sure you take the weekend, look at the class recordings on YouTube. I'm going to put a link to the Yes Philly YouTube channel in the chat right now before we go, so that you can all access this when we're not here. All right, so screenshot, copy and paste that, whatever you need to do. All right. But don't forget to try and have that checkpoint done, since it's already overdue, when we come back on Tuesday. And then we will jump into the stuff for checkpoint 2, talking more about structure and development. Okay. Again, questions about anything before we go? I will also be in the Summit Lab today from 1 to 3 if you want to pop in there and get some help with checkpoint 1 as well. All right, y'all, really good job today. Thank you all for coming, and I will see you in a few at our all-school assembly. All right, stay safe and have a great weekend.